Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? My name is Carolina Chavez, and I am broadcasting live from Miami. Today is Wednesday, July 1st of 2020 already. So, this is the third part of this series of fashion during the civil rights movement, front and center. And just to give a little bit of background of we're going to talk about today about Africa, okay? The first episode we talked about the civil rights movement in the United States and the role fashion always had during all this movement. The second episode we spoke about England, and now we're going to speak about Africa. So to give a little bit of background, Africa has 54 countries. Imagine the richness of culture, religions, climate. It's a very, very diverse group which cannot be put under a single umbrella. Africa is the world's second largest and second most populated continent after Asia. It covers 6% of Earth's total surface area and 20% of land area, okay, of the Earth's land area. It has 1.3 billion people, and it accounts for 16% of the world's population. So despite this wide range of natural resources, the continent is the least wealthy per capita in large due to the legacy of the European colonization in Africa. So this is a very a continent with a very high linguistic diversity. Just imagine there are an estimated 15,000 to 2,000 African languages. Among the most popular are the ones we all of us know: Spanish, English, Italian, French, Portuguese, Swahili, Arabic. So this is for us to see the great diversity, which is part of the richness of the continent, but also for aspects like trade agreements and other stuff. It is complicated because we cannot put the whole continent into one just single aspect. Okay, so let's go to apartheid, which is a system that was characterized by an authoritarian political culture based on white supremacy, which ensured South Africa was dominated politically, socially, and economically by the nation's minority population. So this system of stratification, social stratification, put white citizens on top of everybody else, followed by Asians and coloreds, and then the black Africans. This economy legacy still is prevalent to the day. The social effects apartheid had, it's still prevalent. And apartheid lasted from 1948 to the 1990s, all right? So let's go to fashion, which is our theme. During the apartheid era in South Africa, women also wore hot pants and tops and stilettos as part of their liberating look. I say also because in the United States and in England, women started little by little to use these garments as a symbol of their liberation. It was part of their message of breaking from tradition and breaking from the concepts of inferiority and slavery and colonization and all of these things. So they would, in some African women thought they would liberate themselves by showing off more of their figures with their pants and their tops and the very high heels. But the high heels, we spoke about this like last week, they also used as weapons because they knew they were going to be attacked by the police. So the fact that they knew they could use their shoes, their high heels, as weapons speaks to us volumes about how politicized it was, their way of styling. During that time, in 1951, Drum magazine was established, a South African publication. It was founded in 1951, and this magazine became an integral part during this time because it became an emancipatory space, because there were no spaces or organizations for women were dedicated exclusively to their issues between 1968 and 1977. The magazine is still current. It is under another name, News 24, something like that. But if you Google Drum Magazine South Africa, you will find it. So the magazine engaged women with the question of what it meant to be a modern African woman, and we will see throughout this broadcast how encompassed a lot of messages, and a lot of it was very actual. Like it came hand in hand with everything that was happening throughout the years, sending messages to women of empowerment and liberation and all of these things, and I'm going to give you some examples. Drum magazine always described the world of urban black and the culture, the color, the dreams, ambitions, the hopes and the struggles of women, specifically in the African continent. At first, the magazine glamorized gangster culture and sports, and men were definitely an important role. But women were at the forefront of fashion and shopping in the magazine. Their image was omnipresent, and their visibility grew throughout. Thanks to the magazine, it grew in the public, social, and political life during apartheid-controlled Africa, South Africa. So while this didn't represent a black feminist movement which was emerging in the United States and Britain at the same time, South African women were using the opportunities offered by the movement and the liberation struggle to fight for greater freedoms. During some of the Drum's messages democratized the Afro look and championed for the power of women's scissors and the needles and all of the things they had in their houses, or they were accessible to them, in their struggle for pride and self-styling and liberation, because it gave the opportunity for women that didn't have the means to buy these clothes to do them for themselves, okay? And also celebrated the local textiles. It really was very supportive of this whole movement. Local textiles that were otherwise bought from other countries out of Africa. It empowered women women and the entire population to buy them from Africa, right? So the soul style that was called the Afro look was particularly important in South African women because apartheid restricted so many other areas in their lives. It reflected both gender politics of student activists and a vision of African modernity for a burgeoning class of urban women. Although women shared the same looks and the same taste for the Afro look, it was important for activists to look real black and to make the distinction between activist and non-active women that at that time used wigs and they straightened their hair, they used skin lightener and heavy makeup. But activists incorporated this natural image and the Afro look into their message, grabbing the idea of the Black is Beautiful movement that was beginning to resonate in Africa in the 1970s. This movement, the Black is Beautiful movement, began in the United States in an effort to counteract the racist notion that in America, it was originated, this notion in the American culture that features typical of of black women and men were less attractive or desirable than those of whites. So this cultural movement started in 1960s by African Americans, okay? So given the political stakes of this era, the terms such as urban, black, Afro, modern, and elite were used to describe women wearing the Afro look, but they became, all of these terms became a gendered vocabulary of transgression. While young women were using clothing to challenge traditions, celebrating the beauty of their heritage, government officials and older members of the black middle class were condemning these women for breaking with tradition and adopting Western forms. It wasn't thought that this style was originally from Africa. It was thought it was part of the imperial Western, so it was not accepted. It was not well accepted at all. So apartheid not only centered on economics and politics, but also on cultural denigration. People were segregated to impoverished townships, and that's why their clothing became so important and powerful as a way for them to erase the markers of this township identity, which was considered a sign of inferiority. Apartheid would move to relegated areas, poor education, poor living, poor health, poor everything. And the way they dressed was a signal that they were breaking from that impoverishment and that oppression that apartheid imposed into the South African community. So in some parts of Africa, the clothes and frequenting nightclubs meant for elders that this was particularly of the youth and an unmarried status. It meant that people were young, that they were not married, the lifestyle and the way they dressed, okay? So socialite Marian Morel, who wrote on Drum magazine The Column Girl about town, which was a source for the latest news in fashion and lifestyle, night lifestyle. As soon as she got engaged, she dropped out of her position on the magazine and also changed her ways of dressing because she needed to send a message about how women should dress before and after getting married, and also a message about their lifestyle, all right? She would start to use, instead of their afros and the pants and the tops, she started to use this, the traditional house coat, which is like a long dress, and a headscarf called a doek, which was for married women at that time. Also, advertising in this magazine and other publications would depict women's financial independence, employing models, actresses, beauty queens, singers as examples of the Afro-look lifestyle to attract the socially conscious elite and the aspirationals to this lifestyle. And they would sell skin lighteners, beauty creams, products to beautify their hairs, body mist, and all of that. But this image of the women selling these products was a very specific image, was of this lifestyle of models and singers, etc., wearing very specific clothes, as opposed to ads for household items like detergent and things like that, would feature women wearing the headscarves and the traditional dress that I just mentioned. So throughout Drum's magazine messages, it also encouraged readers to buy from Eastern African cotton, supporting the local textiles. It also encouraged readers to make their own Afro-look fashions, democratizing the Afro-look, championing the power of women making their own clothes, supporting them in the struggle for pride, self-styling, and their liberation through dress. Democratizing means that it made it accessible for everybody who wanted to adopt this lifestyle or this look, no, the Afro look. because as I said, people that lived in the townships that didn't have, let's say, the jobs or the education that other people had, they could play the part. They could access this lifestyle, this elite, by making themselves their own clothes. So at this time, if you were not involved in fashion, you were not part of the elite. And in Africa at that time, elite had a different meaning that it has in the Western. In this country, for example, elite here means a class marker, right? You are part of the elite, and that's that, or not. But there, you could become part of the elite through your lifestyle, through your way of dressing, no? So it was a very strong and empowering mode for women, right, to distinguish themselves, to get out of those segregations. So far from being the frivolous pursuit, fashion was a monumental shift. It became a monumental shift in the ways Africans perceived and projected themselves. For example, Swahili women abandoned the kaniki garment associated with poverty and servility of enslavement for the more colorful kanga print, which was linked to the abolition of slavery, symbolizing freedom and modernity and a new social possibility for the Tanzanian women. Toko Butterfly Nubeni, she was a socialite from Soweto and featured on the covers of newspapers. She became a socialite through her lifestyle and the way she dressed. She was shot to death and decapitated because it was believed that she bought her clothes during doing illicit activities like prostitution. So elite women and educated women were already a problem because they were breaking with all these traditions. But women like Butterfly, it was even more problematic because she urbanized herself through, that's what was thought at that time, she urbanized herself through a certain lifestyle that was obviously less accepted. Even if it was true or not, it wasn't relevant. The relevance was that it was thought that she had this illicit lifestyle that put her into this socialite position, into this elite position. So she was killed because of that. Another controversial aspect during this time was the miniskirt. There was debate between the origins of the miniskirt, whether it was from Africa or the United States or Europe, but just the conversation puts Africa into the as a trendsetter, right, in the middle of the conversation at the table, discussing whether this so popular trend was of African origin. In Swaziland, for example, minis and slacks were prohibited because they lowered public morals. They even had to pay fines for wearing these garments. In Tanzania, government officials and the elders warned women that if they were a phone call is coming in, I'm sorry. Warned women that they risked being beaten or arrested for walking around in their naughty clothes. These attacks and sanctions are against the miniskirts, and women wearing the miniskirts are still prevalent to the day. The Afro and styles of fashion not only represented American imperialism for some in Africa, but also gendered politics. Tradition rituals were sharply focused on differences between men and women. So when women started to wear the Afro looks and trousers and pants, it was very troubling for men and for officials, for the government, for the elders, for the tradition. It was even more troubling, right? Because all of these traditions that were so focused on, making a distinction between men and women. But maybe because of that, or despite all of this, women still found it very liberating to wear pants and dress like boys or like men. Another example, in Mali, wearing afros and miniskirts transgressed notions of decency and purity upheld by Islamism. Model Claire Mawisa, she was the first and youngest model to grace the cover of Cosmopolitan South Africa. She was probably the first black woman that makeup artist and hairstylist ever encountered, and at that time they didn't even have the shades, the color shades they needed for her, or the hair products that were needed for her. Even to the day, we see some brands that make underwear for women, and they're trying to get into, to be more inclusive, but only now creating these more shades to accommodate black women, right? It's like I don't know, these garments, these feminine garments are used so the clothes they're not transparent, right? You don't see the body, so you use these garments close to your shade, skin tones, to hide that you're having underwear, but these skin tones don't match the skin tones of women of color. So we still see this to the day. So because of slavery, we've been speaking about it since our first episode. Because of slavery and women don't having the sufficient means to buy their own clothes, they always had this culture of making clothes for themselves, secondhand, upcycling. We saw it from slavery through colonization, and then the movements in the United States where college students also were encouraged, also through a magazine, to make their own garments. So to the day, the second-hand clothing industry in Africa is $1 billion business. Ghana, Nigeria, the Ivory Coast, Tanzania, Benin, Uganda, and Kenya are among the biggest markets for second-hand clothes. Kenya alone imports 100,000 tons of second-hand clothes a year, providing the government revenues from custom duties and creating tens of thousands of jobs. It also offers quality clothes for Kenyans, many of whom earn less in a month than what a pair of new Ralph Lauren, let's say khakis, cost in the West. So we're going to speak a little bit more in detail about the second-hand industry and the upcycling and all of this. Also with how the industry is handled here in the United States, because it is said, there's controversy as usual about it. It is said that all of the clothes that we go and donate go to landfills, or we're dumping them in countries or continents like Africa. But in Africa, we see that it is actually a very big industry that benefit, bring money and bring the possibility to wear decent clothes, right? So we're gonna speak more in detail about this on our next episode. Remember that we have a part 1 and a part 2 of fashion at the center of the civil rights movement. You can find both broadcasts on my Facebook page. So thank you so much for being with me. I will see you next week, okay? Take care and see you soon.